Ever wonder why some of Hollywood's most celebrated films disappeared for decades? Before Stonewall, filmmakers smuggled queer themes past censors using coded language, glances, and innuendo. Studio executives and government officials would routinely pull movies from theaters, slash entire scenes, or ban them outright. These 15 classics risked everything to tell stories that couldn't be told directly. Keep watching to discover Hollywood's secret rainbow history. Rope, 1948. Alfred Hitchcock's Rope didn't just push boundaries with its experimental one-take style. It dared to base its plot on the infamous Leopold and Loeb murder case, featuring two men whose relationship was unmistakably more than friendship. The film follows Brandon and Philip, two intellectual young men who commit murder to prove their superiority, then host a dinner party with the body hidden in plain sight. Hitchcock's genius was turning homosexuality into the film's unspoken third character. Every glance between Brandon and Philip crackled with intimate knowledge. Every movement in their shared apartment suggested two people who knew each other's bodies well. Censors demanded multiple cuts, forcing Hitchcock to remove several lingering looks and physical touches, but they couldn't erase the fundamental tension. James Stewart, who starred as their former teacher, reportedly felt uncomfortable with the film's subtext, telling friends, "It's not the kind of picture I thought it would be." The National Legion of Decency condemned it as morally objectionable, and multiple states refused to screen it. Chicago's film board demanded so many cuts that Hitchcock famously quipped, "They left the opening credits and the end title." For decades, Rope was nearly impossible to find, withdrawn from circulation by Hitchcock himself in 1968. When finally released on home video in the 1980s, audiences rediscovered what critics had whispered about for years. Hitchcock had crafted one of cinema's most daring examinations of queerness and moral philosophy, all while technically never showing anything improper at all. The Children's Hour, 1961. William Wyler's The Children's Hour tackled the forbidden subject of lesbianism with such unflinching honesty that it was banned in several countries and heavily restricted in the United States. Based on Lillian Hellman's play, the film stars Audrey Hepburn and Shirley MacLaine as two women who run a girls' school in New England. When a troublemaking student spreads a rumor that they're lovers, their lives and reputations are destroyed. The original 1936 film adaptation, called These Three, completely erased the lesbian storyline, replacing it with a heterosexual love triangle. But Wyler returned to direct this faithful version 25 years later, determined to tell the story as written. MacLaine's heart-wrenching confession scene, "I've loved you the way they said," marked one of the first honest portrayals of a woman coming to terms with her attraction to another woman in mainstream American cinema. The film was released without production code approval, receiving the dreaded condemned rating from the Catholic Legion of Decency. Boston authorities threatened theater owners with obscenity charges, while countries including the UK, Australia, and Ireland banned it outright. Even in places where it showed, newspapers refused to run advertisements containing its title. Despite the controversy, the film earned 5 Academy Award nominations. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called it a milestone in maturity, while others condemned it as Hollywood's sickest film. Wyler later said, "I wanted to make a film about the terrible power of a lie, but also about the terrible power of our unwillingness to accept people who are different from us." Tea and Sympathy, 1956. Tea and Sympathy dared to explore the ultimate 1950s taboo, a teenage boy suspected of being gay. The film follows Tom, a sensitive student at an all-male boarding school who prefers tennis and classical music to football. His classmates cruelly nickname him Sister Boy, while the faculty encourages brutal hazing to make a man out of him. Only the housemaster's wife, Laura, played by Deborah Kerr, shows him kindness. The Broadway play by Robert Anderson caused a sensation, running for 712 performances despite explicit homosexual themes. For the film adaptation, MGM demanded extensive revisions. Gone was any direct mention of homosexuality, replaced with vague references to Tom being different and not like other boys. The original ending, where Laura sleeps with Tom to prove his manhood, was altered to include a framing device showing Laura's unhappy future, punishment for her transgression against 1950s morality. Even with these changes, the Catholic Legion of Decency gave it a C for condemned rating. Several states demanded additional cuts, and international distribution was limited. Audiences nonetheless understood the subtext. The film's famous closing line, "Years from now, when you talk about this, and you will be kind," became a cultural touchstone for compassion toward those who don't fit gender norms. Director Vincente Minnelli, who many film historians believe was himself closeted, created a visually stunning film filled with coded imagery. John Kerr's nuanced performance as Tom won critical praise, though he later complained, "I felt castrated by the censorship. We weren't allowed to tell the real story, and everyone knew what the real story was." Suddenly, last summer, 1959. Suddenly, last summer might be the most shocking queer narrative ever to slip past Hollywood censors. Based on Tennessee Williams's play, the film stars Elizabeth Taylor as Catherine, traumatized after witnessing her cousin Sebastian's death, and Katharine Hepburn as Violet, Sebastian's mother who wants Catherine lobotomized to silence her delusions. Montgomery Clift plays the psychiatrist caught between them. The film never explicitly states Sebastian's homosexuality, but the coded language was unmistakable. He used Violet and later Catherine as procurers to attract young men. His death, torn apart and partially eaten by boys he had exploited, served as a grotesque metaphor for the dangers facing gay men. Producer Sam Spiegel fought censors by insisting Sebastian was a sensitive poet rather than homosexual, while director Joseph L. Mankiewicz filled the film with visual symbolism, including carnivorous plants and relentless imagery of consumption. Catholic officials placed it on the condemned list, calling it a corruptive and harmful film. 8 states demanded significant cuts before allowing screenings. In Tennessee, Williams' hometown of Columbus, Mississippi, the mayor personally blocked its showing, declaring it too degenerate for decent people to view. Internationally, it faced outright bans in Spain, Ireland, and several South American countries. Despite the controversy, the film was a box office sensation and earned 3 Oscar nominations. Both Taylor and Hepburn received Best Actress nominations, though Hepburn reportedly despised the film, later calling it a terrible, terrible error in judgment. Film critic Judith Crist praised it as the most stunning, shocking movie of the year, while others condemned it as a festival of perversion masquerading as art. Rebecca, 1940. Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, the only Hitchcock film to win Best Picture, contains one of cinema's earliest coded lesbian characters, Mrs. Danvers, the sinister housekeeper obsessed with her dead employer. Based on Daphne du Maurier's novel, the film follows an unnamed young bride who marries wealthy widower Maxime de Winter, only to find herself haunted by his first wife's memory, a memory fanatically preserved by the unnervingly devoted Mrs. Danvers. Judith Anderson's performance as Danvers created an iconic queer villain. Her fixation on Rebecca transcended normal loyalty, particularly in the infamous scene where she lovingly displays Rebecca's intimate garments, stroking them while describing how they would slide against Rebecca's skin. In the novel, this attraction was more explicit, but Hitchcock conveyed it through lingering camera work and Anderson's intense gaze. The Hays office objected to several scenes, particularly when Danvers opens Rebecca's bedroom curtains, whispering, "Listen to the sea. She can hear it. She often comes to watch the sea." The implication that Rebecca's ghost still visited, potentially witnessing the newlyweds' intimacy, was considered too disturbing. Hitchcock fought to keep the scene, arguing its psychological horror value outweighed any improper suggestion. The Legion of Decency initially threatened a C rating unless producer David O. Selznick toned down Danvers' obsession. Selznick responded by having psychological experts testify that Danvers exhibited pathological jealousy rather than homosexual attraction, a distinction that satisfied censors while changing nothing in the actual film. Despite these hurdles, Rebecca became a critical and commercial triumph. Anderson's performance remains a masterclass in suggesting forbidden desire through gesture and tone alone, creating a character Bosley Crowther called more terrifying than any ghost, precisely because her devotion felt so real. Queen Christina, 1933. Greta Garbo's Queen Christina offered Depression-era audiences something truly revolutionary. A gender-bending historical epic starring Hollywood's most enigmatic star as Sweden's 17th-century monarch, who dressed as a man, refused to marry, and had intense relationships with women. The film focuses on Christina's romance with a Spanish envoy, but doesn't shy away from her relationship with her lady-in-waiting, Countess Ebba Sparre. The opening scenes show Christina in men's clothing, riding astride rather than side saddle, and being mistaken for a man, all historically accurate details about the real queen. In one remarkable scene, Christina kisses Ebba on the lips and says, "I have often thought that I was meant to be a man," to which Ebba responds, "I'm very glad you're not." This scene survived only because it preceded the strict enforcement of the production code in 1934. MGM marketed the film carefully, emphasizing the forbidden royal romance between Garbo and John Gilbert. Yet audiences weren't fooled. One reviewer noted, "The Queen's relationship with her lady-in-waiting contains more genuine passion than her supposed great love affair." The film faced extensive cuts in many states, with Ohio removing nearly 7 minutes of footage, featuring Christina's masculine behavior and intimate moments with Ebba. Internationally, the film caused even greater controversy. Italy banned it outright under Mussolini, claiming it mocked monarchy and traditional gender roles. Germany permitted a heavily edited version that eliminated all references to Christina's resistance to marriage and scenes of her in men's attire. Garbo, whose own sexuality was the subject of Hollywood gossip, reportedly fought for the film's more daring elements. Director Ruben Mamoulian later revealed, "She told me, I want to show Christina as she was, not what censors think a queen should be." The resulting film remains a landmark of pre-code cinema that wouldn't be matched in its portrayal of gender fluidity for decades. Advise and Consent, 1962. Otto Preminger's Advise and Consent shocked Washington and Hollywood by daring to include a gay bar scene in a political drama about Senate confirmation hearings. Based on Alan Drury's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, the film follows the contentious nomination of a Secretary of State with a controversial past. The subplot involving Senator Brig Anderson, played by Don Murray, broke significant new ground. When Anderson is blackmailed over a wartime relationship with another man, Preminger's camera follows him into an underground gay bar in New York City. The first realistic portrayal of such an establishment in mainstream American cinema. The scene shows actual gay men, not actors, drinking and socializing, creating a documentary-like glimpse into a world most audiences had never seen. Anderson's subsequent shame and tragedy highlighted the devastating consequences of homophobia. The Production Code Administration initially refused to approve the film, calling the gay bar sequence beyond the bounds of acceptability. Preminger, famous for challenging censors with The Moon is Blue and The Man with the Golden Arm, refused to cut it. He released the film without code approval, arguing its political importance demanded honesty about all forms of power and coercion in Washington. Several theater chains refused to book the film, while others required patrons to sign statements confirming they were over 21. The New York Daily News called it a new low in Hollywood depravity, while other critics praised its courage. Senator Margaret Chase Smith, the only woman in the Senate at that time, praised the film's realism, noting, "It shows the pressures we face, though some of my colleagues wish certain pressures remained unacknowledged." Years later, Frank Capra admitted rejecting the chance to direct, advise, and consent, specifically because of the gay storyline, saying, "I couldn't film that material and face my grandchildren." Preminger's willingness to do so helped pave the way for more honest portrayals of LGBTQ characters in American cinema. Victim, 1961. Victim stands as one of cinema's most courageous films, the first English-language movie to use the word homosexual, and a direct challenge to Britain's laws criminalizing gay men. Dirk Bogarde, then a matinee idol, risked his entire career to play Melville Farr, a married barrister who decides to expose blackmailers preying on gay men rather than continue living in fear. The film's production faced enormous obstacles. Several actors refused roles after reading the script, financing repeatedly fell through, and British censors demanded numerous changes. Bogarde later revealed receiving death threats, while director Basil Dearden was warned the film would end British cinema as we know it. The British Board of Film Classification initially refused certification unless all references to homosexuality were removed, effectively demanding the entire plot be scrapped. American distributors faced even greater challenges. The Production Code Administration rejected the film outright, forcing independent distribution through art houses. Many states banned it completely, while others required audiences to sign disclaimers acknowledging they were viewing controversial and adult material. The Catholic Legion of Decency placed it on the condemned list, calling it a direct attempt to gain public acceptance for perverted behavior. Despite these obstacles, Victim had tangible social impact. The film is widely credited with contributing to the 1967 Sexual Offences Act, which partially decriminalized homosexuality in England. Home Secretary Roy Jenkins later acknowledged the film did more for the public understanding of homosexuality than any other single work. Bogarde, who many film historians believe was gay himself, called it the most important film I ever made. When asked years later if he regretted potentially damaging his career, he responded, "It had to be done. Someone had to have the courage to speak up. I'm ashamed it took so long." Rebel Without a Cause, 1955. Nicholas Ray's Rebel Without a Cause might be remembered for James Dean's iconic red jacket, but beneath its troubled teen narrative lies one of Hollywood's most daring explorations of queer adolescence. The relationship between Dean's Jim Stark and Sal Mineo's Plato created a blueprint for depicting same-gender attraction that influenced generations of filmmakers. Plato's worship of Jim was unmistakably romantic, keeping Jim's photo in his locker, watching him adoringly, and ultimately dying in his arms in the film's tragic climax. The original screenplay was even more explicit, including a scene where Plato would have kissed Jim, something unthinkable in 1955 Hollywood. Instead, Ray conveyed their connection through lingering glances, physical proximity, and domestic imagery when they play house in the abandoned mansion. Warner Brothers executives demanded multiple script revisions to downplay Plato's attraction. Ray fought to maintain the character's emotional truth, later saying, "The story was always about different kinds of love, some acceptable to society, others not." Mineo, himself gay but not publicly out, infused the role with authentic yearning that resonated with queer audiences who recognized themselves on screen. The film faced varying censorship across America. Ohio removed several minutes of footage showing physical contact between Jim and Plato. Chicago demanded cutting Plato's line about his father figure being gone, claiming it contained perverted implications. Memphis banned the film entirely until 1956, citing its unwholesome emotional disturbances. Film historian Vito Russo noted the genius of the film was making Plato the perfect synthesis of two 1950s stereotypes, the juvenile delinquent and the sensitive misfit. This complexity helped Rebel avoid the most severe censorship while still conveying its queer narrative. Dean's tragic death shortly before the film's release added another layer of mythic significance, transforming what might have been controversial into something immediately legendary. The Haunting, 1963. Robert Wise's The Haunting isn't just one of cinema's greatest ghost stories. It's also a pioneering portrayal of lesbian desire disguised as a supernatural thriller. Based on Shirley Jackson's novel, the film follows four people investigating paranormal activity in Hill House, including Theodora, played by Claire Bloom, whose psychic abilities are matched only by her stylish wardrobe and undisguised attraction to Eleanor, played by Julie Harris. Theodora's lesbianism is remarkably overt for 1963. She wears mannish clothes, refers to a roommate back home with pointed emphasis, and becomes jealous when Eleanor shows interest in the expedition's male leader. In the novel, Jackson explicitly identifies Theo as lesbian, but screenwriter Nelson Gidding knew such directness would never pass censors. Instead, he created a character whose identity is perfectly clear without ever needing to be stated. The British Board of Film Classification demanded several cuts, particularly scenes where Theodora comforts a frightened Eleanor in bed. American censors required removal of Theo's line, "The world is full of inconsistencies. Nature's mistakes, like me," claiming it too obviously referenced homosexuality. Director Wise later recalled fighting to keep the scene where Theo reads Eleanor's mind, saying, "It showed their connection went beyond the physical, which made it more profound and threatening to censors." Many reviewers pretended not to understand the character's sexuality. The New York Times obliquely mentioned Theo's ambiguous personal life, while Time magazine called her oddly masculine. Yet the film found an appreciative audience. One theater owner in San Francisco reported seeing the same women returning multiple times, always sitting together in the back row. Claire Bloom later said she understood the character immediately. There was nothing subtle about Theo's sexuality. The beauty of the role was showing how her psychic abilities and her identity as a lesbian were connected. Both made her an outsider, but both gave her special insight the others lacked. Compulsion, 1959. Compulsion delivered one of Hollywood's most daring portrayals of queer criminality by adapting the infamous Leopold and Loeb murder case, the same case that inspired Rope. But while Hitchcock's film used suggestion and innuendo, director Richard Fleischer's approach was far more direct, showing the psychological and physical intimacy between two wealthy law students who commit murder to prove their intellectual superiority. Dean Stockwell and Bradford Dillman play Artie Strauss and Judd Steiner, thinly disguised versions of the real killers. Their relationship clearly transcends friendship, particularly in scenes where Artie manipulates Judd through a combination of intellectual flattery and physical intimidation. Their dynamic creates an unmistakable homoerotic tension, especially when Artie forces Judd to renew their blood oath by cutting their hands and pressing them together. 20th Century Fox executives demanded numerous script changes, eliminating direct references to the killer's relationship. Director Fleischer fought to maintain the psychological truth, later saying, "The case was famous precisely because of the relationship between these two men. Pretending otherwise would have made the story incomprehensible." He cleverly used Orson Welles' character, their defense attorney, to explain their unnatural attachment in psychological terms that satisfied censors while conveying the truth to audiences. The film received an adult rating from the Legion of Decency, which warned it contained perverted moral principles. Several southern states banned it outright, while others required substantial cuts. In Chicago, where the actual murder occurred, authorities initially blocked its release, relenting only after removing scenes showing physical contact between the killers. Critics recognized what the film was showing. The Los Angeles Times noted it skirts the edges of the production code with remarkable boldness, while Variety praised it for suggesting much while showing little. The performances by Stockwell and Dillman won particular acclaim, with Dillman later admitting, "We both understood exactly what kind of relationship we were portraying, even if we couldn't say it directly." All About Eve, 1950. Joseph L. Mankiewicz's All About Eve wrapped its queerness in sophisticated dialogue and theatrical ambition, creating a world where sexuality exists in knowing glances and razor-sharp wit. The film follows Eve Harrington, who insinuates herself into the life of Broadway star Margot Channing, gradually attempting to steal her career, friends, and fiancé. The film's queer subtext appears throughout, from theater critic Addison DeWitt's coded effeminacy to the intense relationships between women that dominate the narrative. Most striking is Eve's manipulation of playwright Lloyd Richards' wife, Karen, played by Celeste Holm. Their scenes together simmer with uncomfortable intimacy, particularly when Eve clings to Karen, begging not to be left alone. The Hayes office demanded several cuts to these scenes, with censor Joseph Breen writing that they suggest a questionable relationship between women. While Eve pursues men as part of her social climbing, her true passion seems reserved for Margot herself, played magnificently by Bette Davis. Their relationship contains elements of both worship and destruction that transcend normal admiration. As film historian Vito Russo noted, Eve doesn't want to be with Margot's boyfriend. She wants to be Margot, wear her clothes, and occupy her space. A perfect metaphor for homosexual panic in the 1950s. The film faced censorship battles internationally. Italy demanded removal of all scenes featuring Eve alone with Karen. France required additional dialogue emphasizing Eve's interest in men. Even in America, several theater chains refused bookings in conservative regions, considering it too sophisticated for general audiences, code language for morally questionable. Despite these challenges, All About Eve won 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Its influence on queer cinema remains immeasurable, establishing the bitchy dialogue style that would become a cornerstone of camp aesthetics. As George Sanders's Addison DeWitt says in the film, "You're too short for that gesture," a line that launched 1,000 drag performances and secured the film's place in queer cultural history. The Servant, 1963, Joseph Losey's The Servant, remains one of cinema's most unsettling explorations of class, power, and repressed desire. This British psychological drama follows the relationship between Tony, an aristocratic bachelor, and Barrett, his enigmatic manservant, as their master-servant dynamic gradually inverts through psychological manipulation, coded homosexual attraction, and sinister domination. Dirk Bogarde, fresh from his groundbreaking role in Victim, delivers a masterful performance as Barrett, whose servile manner masks contempt and desire for his employer. Harold Pinter's screenplay never explicitly names the attraction between the men, instead creating a suffocating atmosphere where every glance carries forbidden meaning. In one pivotal scene, Barrett bathes Tony while discussing his employer's girlfriend, an intimate moment so charged with subtext that British censors demanded substantial cuts. The British Board of Film Classification initially rejected the film outright, calling it psychologically harmful to viewers. Losey fought back, arguing its artistic merit transcended any moral concerns. The film eventually received an X certificate after removing several scenes, including one where Barrett watches Tony sleep and another showing their legs intertwined during a drunken evening. American distributors faced similar challenges, with the Production Code Administration refusing approval until additional cuts were made. Even with these modifications, many theaters refused to screen it. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it as morally objectionable, while several critics seemed deliberately oblivious to its sexual themes. The New York Times bizarrely described it as a study of servitude, without acknowledging the nature of that servitude. Director Losey, who had fled America during the McCarthy-era blacklist, understood persecution and coded expression. He later commented, "The film is about power and possession. Who owns whom? Sex is just one expression of that ownership." This layered approach allowed The Servant to explore forbidden desire while maintaining enough ambiguity to reach audiences, creating what critic Pauline Kael called the most intelligent British film ever made. Purple Noon, 1960. René Clément's Purple Noon, the original adaptation of Patricia Highsmith's The Talented Mr. Ripley, sizzles with homoerotic tension that later American versions would dilute. This French thriller stars Alain Delon as Tom Ripley, a young American hired to retrieve Playboy Philippe Greenleaf from his extended Italian holiday. What begins as a simple job evolves into obsession, as Tom covets not just Philippe's wealth and lifestyle, but perhaps Philippe himself. Delon's performance as Ripley created a template for queer villainy that balanced menace with vulnerable desire. His Ripley doesn't just want Philippe's life. He wants to consume him completely, trying on his clothes when alone, mimicking his mannerisms, and showing more jealousy toward Philippe's fiancée than any friend normally would. The famous boat scene, where a shirtless Tom watches Philippe sunbathing, contains more erotic tension than most explicit love scenes. French censors were less concerned with homosexual undertones than their American counterparts, allowing Clément to suggest much more than contemporary Hollywood films. Still, the film faced significant editing for its American release, with nearly 8 minutes removed, mostly from scenes showing physical proximity between the men. The American distributor added a new ending that punished Ripley for his crimes, a moral correction the original French version deliberately avoided. Several American cities banned the film, despite these changes. Boston authorities cited its unwholesome attraction between men, while Chicago required removing the scene where Tom practices forging Philippe's signature while wearing his bathrobe. A moment of identity transference with clear erotic undertones. Critics worldwide recognized what was happening beneath the thriller elements. The French publication Cahiers du Cinéma praised its dangerous masculine beauty, while British reviewer Dilys Powell noted its disturbing conflation of desire and destruction. Today, film scholars consider Purple Noon a landmark of queer cinema precisely because it shows how desire could be portrayed through glances, gestures, and Mediterranean sunlight, rather than explicit declaration. Edge of the City, 1957. Martin Ritt's Edge of the City broke significant racial and sexual barriers by portraying the friendship between a white drifter and a black dockworker in a way that clearly transcended typical buddy dynamics. John Cassavetes plays Axel North, a troubled young man hiding from his past, who forms an intense bond with Sidney Poitier's Tommy Tyler that challenges 1950s boundaries of both race and masculinity. The relationship between these men carried unmistakable homoerotic undertones, particularly in scenes where Tommy teaches Axel to dance. Their playful wrestling matches and moments of physical and emotional intimacy rarely shown between men in 1950s cinema. Tommy's tragic fate, beaten to death defending Axel, follows the tragic queer narrative common in films that dared suggest same-sex attraction. The screenplay by Robert Allen Arthur began as a television play called A Man is 10 Feet Tall, which NBC aired with significant censorship. For the film version, MGM executives demanded numerous changes to downplay both racial integration and the intensity of the men's connection. Director Ritt, himself blacklisted during the McCarthy era, fought to maintain the story's emotional core, later saying, "We knew exactly what we were suggesting. The question was how much we could show without the film being banned entirely." The compromises worked, barely. The Production Code Administration granted approval after several edits, though at least 5 southern states banned it anyway, citing its dangerous mixing of races. Other regions required removing scenes of physical contact between the men. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave it a B rating, morally objectionable in part, warning about its unwholesome emotional elements. Critics largely focused on the racial aspects while ignoring or downplaying the homoerotic subtext. Bosley Crowther praised its brave stand against prejudice, without specifying which prejudices the film challenged. Time magazine called it unnecessarily emotional, a coded criticism often applied to films depicting intense male relationships. Today, Edge of the City is recognized as a pioneering work that pushed boundaries of representation in multiple directions simultaneously. From hidden glances to coded dialogue, these films risked everything to tell stories that couldn't be told directly. Each director found creative ways to smuggle truth past censors who tried desperately to keep queer narratives off screen. Which of these banned classics surprised you most? Did we miss any films that deserve recognition for their groundbreaking representation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell us, could today's filmmakers learn something from these pioneers who had to say so much while appearing to say so little?